Hi everyone and welcome to episode 6 of Stacks of Questions. It's us again, the assessment team. We're going to be answering some of your questions and going head to head in a challenge. My name is Kimberly Jeans. I am based in Woodmill High School in Dunfermline. I have been a computing science teacher for 16 years, and with me tonight are Morag and Colin. Colin, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
So I am Colin Lamont. I am head of computing at a school in Glasgow, and I have been teaching for 15 or maybe 16, if I do the maths. I can't remember, years.
Fantastic. And Morag?
Hello, I'm Morag Shaw, currently working at University of Glasgow as associate tutor, but based in Inverclyde, taught in Inverclyde for many years, so many years I outstripped both Kim and Colin put together.
And actually, both of you guys have worked or do work for the SQA too, so I think that's important to mention. There's lots of skills in the room, you guys, much more than mine, but I think that's important for us to mention too. So we're going to go head to head and start doing a challenge tonight, but before that, shall we have a look at some of the questions from our previous STACS conference? So let's go over to them now. Okay, so last week we did 3 of these questions already. So we've got our spinner ready from last week or last time, and we're going to spin our spinner again and answer some of these questions. These came from the audience at the STACS conference that you guys were at before the Christmas break. So number 1, when should I introduce Squirrel to pupils? This is one that I'm not good at. So what do you guys think?
So I used to go all the way till March before I did Squirrel. So it was like, get the prelim out the way. So the prelim was written in the language that they were working in, then get the assignment out the way because they're not going to see any Squirrel in the assignment. And then just when it gets to exam prep, that's when I introduce Squirrel, just so that they're not, taken aback by it and surprised by anything when it comes to the exam. But actually more recently, I've kind of been using Squirrel in homeworks. So rather than using the kind of, we're Python now, so rather than using Python in homework tasks, use Squirrel in homework tasks so that they're kind of getting a sort of weekly drip feed of a kind of exposure to Squirrel. And then the prelim is in Squirrel now, and then obviously the final exam that they'll see is in Squirrel. So I've kind of shifted to bring Squirrel in earlier than it certainly used to be in my courses.
Yeah, I actually think that when I listen to you say that, that's probably more close to what I do in the classroom now. We used to, a few years ago, actually have proper task sheets that the kids would do. So very similar to when you would teach them how to use the programming language, Python, Visual Basic, whatever, that the kids would work through to learn Squirrel. So I think from that perspective, it's a lot less formalized. We don't do that anymore. But I am using proper past paper questions from quite early on. So it's not something that I think I probably need to get better at teaching the nuances of it maybe to my kids. But I am, from very near the beginning, as soon as they can, really using homeworks of past paper questions that use Squirrel. Our prelim has always been in Squirrel. So I think probably more like what you said there is dripped throughout the year and not something maybe I explicitly teach, but the kids are definitely exposed to, is maybe the word that I would use. What about you, Morag, when you were in the classroom? What did you kind of do?
I think early on when we first started with Squirrel, for N5 there was very little difference for us because therefore for the pupils it was a very, very straight, very, very simple translation. So we didn't really have to do anything in particular. But as we got nearer prelim, we would have more focus on using Squirrel, and certainly before exam prep there'd be much more focus for N5. For higher, I think it's important that you do introduce it formally. Yeah, they formally know things like the record structure and how that's set up and how to read that when they see any of that written in Squirrel. If they happen to see a record structure written, they actually understand how that translates in their own language, and therefore they can process it. And I think as you go through the levels, it does become quite different. I think it just depends on what language you're using in the first place, what your implementation language is.
Yeah.
What differences you're aware of, but there are nuances that candidates really do need to be aware of. And certainly by the time, I know we're not necessarily discussing advanced higher, but there's huge differences in the OO in advanced higher and many other languages, particularly Python. And it's really important that they can read it and they actually understand what's going on and what the nuances are. So I think it does become it's earlier in different year groups. And much more formal in different year groups and higher. I was always particular about teaching them the record structure one. I think that was really important that they understood that and arrays of records and what to expect, when to see it, how to see it being used. And the other thing is in advanced higher, showing them the OO code and what that would look like.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. I think that actually as well, when you look at Squirrel too, like there are some bits of it, like in my school, we've always used Visual Basic, and I know that a lot of people prefer to use Python, but actually when you look at it, there are a lot of things you can see that match more closely to Visual Basic or match more closely to Python. I know there's other languages out there people use too, but when I'm teaching it to the kids or when I'm talking about it to the kids, that's where I find myself. I say, oh, actually, this is more similar to Python, talking about different programming languages. I'm not talking about it necessarily by itself, but linking it to how its similarities, if you like, and its layout and things like that. Especially when you come into like parameter passing and modularity, you can see its similarities to Python compared to maybe the record structure is much more similar to something like Visual Basic.
So when I moved from VB to Python, I had always had an end if and a like next for your counter and your fixed loop, and then Python gets rid of all of that. Yeah. But then it reappears in Squirrel, and my Python pupils were like, why do I need end if? Why does it say end if? That must be an error. And you're saying, well, no, actually, in other languages, these things exist. And it took me a bit of a shift to go from VB, where you needed it, to Python, where you didn't need it, to then Squirrel, where you needed it again. And it's those sort of wee things that could quite easily throw a candidate.
Yeah. I suppose you make that decision, don't you, when you pick your programming language you go with as well.
I think you have to be aware of it. Yeah, definitely you have to be aware of the differences. And a big problem for all Python candidates is the declaration of variables and the fact that it's dynamic. And it's dynamic in many languages nowadays, but it's important that they understand that the reference language is very Java-like, and it's not dynamic in Java, so they have to be very specifically declaring the data types, and that's important, particularly as soon as you get into polymorphism. I know that we're not discussing it, but as soon as you're in there, they haven't got a snowflake's chance of understanding polymorphism and the differences and the subtleties there, unless they really, really have been deliberately taught that. Yeah. Not taught the polymorphism, but deliberately taught how it appears in the reference language, which is very Java-like at that stage.
Yeah. I think that's important to mention before we move on to the next question as well, in case anyone here is listening as a brand new teacher, or if somebody has been teaching for a really long time and is maybe not as familiar with the documents. When we're talking about Squirrel, we're talking about the SQA reference language that you find in the prelims and you find in past papers and things, which I'm sure you've probably gleaned from the context what we're talking about. But I know that the Squirrel itself, the term, wasn't something I heard a lot of until I started working with you, Per. So I think that's important to mention to people. What was it formerly known? Was it haggis?
And I still call it haggis, and the kids all just like buckle because it's like, what are you talking about, this haggis nonsense? I was like, would you prefer me to call it Squirrel? And they were like, stick with haggis.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the Squirrel SQA reference language. Okay, anything to add before we move on to another question?
Nope, go for it.
Go for it.
Okay, so next question is question number 9. So question 9, how can I help pupils to understand their own errors or error messages? Well, we know the opposite of what we should do here. I think that we definitely don't need to be fixing it for them. I think that still loads of teachers can be really guilty that we are just up against time, multiple levels in one classroom. We head over and we just say, "Oh, you've forgotten a or you've forgotten a dot in between your foreign key and your alias for your table or whatever it is you're doing, the name of your table, sorry, and your attribute." So how do you guys tend to help pupils understand your own errors or their own errors better? Any techniques?
I just think it has to start when they're much younger. When, if you like, to an extent, the errors are simpler, but they're much younger, and so that the habit is formed. They know that they're learning that actually I'm responsible for my errors and I need to fix them. One thing we used to do was we used to give them broken code, and they like fixing teachers' broken code. They didn't mind that. They hated fixing their own, but they liked fixing ours. So giving them regular practice of here's some broken programs, here's what the requirements are, here's what it should do, now here's some code that's broken. And it can be a query, it can be a web page, it can be anything, it can be programming language. Here's some tasks that they're not working, find the errors, fix the errors, and just getting them used to those kind of things, I think, from as early as possible, getting them independent. Talking to them about what errors, demonstrating the errors, when you're introducing something new like record structures, whatever it might be, then you're actually saying, so what are the common, file handling is an obvious one. What are the common, what's likely to happen? What could go wrong? Asking them what could go wrong. Oh, it's the wrong file. You got the wrong path name. You've got all those things. And actually showing them, that type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually we do that quite a lot in the BG at our school, much further down the school. You're right, so we try to, as much as possible, when we're doing a unit on, say, HTML and in S1 or S2, we're going to have two types of assessments. You're going to have your theory assessment and they're going to have the practical assessment. And the practical assessment is building up the skills they're going to use in the assignment to try and do some of these things. So again, that open book nature. But then the theory assessment, we always have spot the errors, or this is what the output looks like, but it should look like that. So very cognizant of actually what the National 5 and higher papers are like, but getting them to understand those things much further down. I think that, again, these type of questions are really important when we're talking about something that doesn't give you feedback too, because obviously in programming languages like in Visual Basic or Python, even Access, you get a pop-up that'll tell you or give you a bit of a hint as to what's wrong. But I think with web, I know a lot of people still do web, this could be one of the reasons why the kids struggle a little bit, because there isn't actually much feedback. You're trying to guess from what you see on the screen what either hasn't been implemented or what's in the wrong place, especially when it comes to higher web with things like your padding and your margins and stuff like that. Do you think?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think debugging web is probably one of the most difficult things that we ask kids to do, because there's not a lot of feedback. You don't have a kind of even a line being highlighted and it telling you there's something wrong somewhere around and about here. But whenever there is an error message, rather than when I approach a kid who's stuck, I do always try and start the conversation with, so what's the error message saying? And then at least get them to read the words, even if they don't understand the words. So my third year were doing equijoins this week, and they were all getting an error message that says ambiguous column name. And they don't know what ambiguous column name means, but I'm getting them to say those words. And hopefully every time they say it, and then I'm saying it's because that field's in two tables, they're then realizing, oh, I've got that error again. Oh, it's because it's in two tables. Oh, I know how to fix it. But it's trying to have enough headspace to go to approach the problem with not just, I'm going to fix it for you. It's, what is it trying to tell you? What is it saying? What's the feedback from the code type?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like talk to the duck. It's like the first approach is get them to explain the error, what's going wrong, what should it be doing, but the other thing is asking them what should be happening. If you know, if it's gone wrong, it's like they need to be able to do two things: one, tell you what the error is, but what should it be doing?
Yeah.
Why is it wrong? So
yeah, totally. I totally agree with that, Morag. I've been using that technique with my National 5. So my National 5s just now are deep in the depths of learning how to do query designs and learning how to do SQL for databases. And there's just a couple of my kids who just don't have a lot of resilience, who just find it, they want reassurance all the time. So, and they'll say to me, could you just look at this question, look at this question, look at this answer? And my technique that I do is I don't let them read me the question. So I say, I don't want you to tell me the question is, but what I'll do is I'll look at your SQL and I'll tell you what that SQL says. So I'll read it and say, right, so what you've asked it to do is to select this, this, and this attribute from these tables. You're not wanting to join the tables because I can see you've not got an equijoin in there. And then you've also selected, if it was a wildcard or whatever, then I would say, I know that's higher, but, I would say what the criteria is. And then I would say, it looks like you've not been asked for a sort order because you've not included that. And then that will then allow them to think back to what the question was, to be, oh, actually, I needed this, or I needed that, or that's not what I wanted to display, and put the onus on them to try and figure it out. I'm just explaining to them what code it is that they've written down. And I found that that's helped a lot. And the kids have managed to pull out their own errors by me saying, well, this is what I think you're trying to display. Is that what you wanted to display? Sort of thing.
Yeah. I think a lot of it comes back to them understanding the problem, which comes back to last episode on analysis, and the fact that sometimes they're just jumping straight into the task. They're not actually pausing to stop and think, what should this be doing? What have I to do? And then they just go create code to do something. It's not working.
Yeah.
So tell me what it should do. What is it doing? Now let's compare those things. And start you're trying to make them independent so that when they get to assignment, they can actually do something themselves, and they're not stuck down a rabbit hole and they can't get out of it.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty as well with software development is trying to get them ready for those different types of errors, because they're always very good at fixing syntax errors because they're underlined in the right place, and when it comes to those execution errors, knowing what line it is that's causing the issue. But at like my S3s, we're doing a kind of National Foresight style assessment today, and they were really struggling with lots of logic errors. It was interesting looking at how they reacted to dealing with the errors, because they were just like, but it's running. You know, like simple things like, for example, they'd set up their variables as strings instead of integers, and when they tried to add those values together, they concatenated them and they couldn't understand where they'd went wrong. And it was really interesting to kind of see their response to it. I think that that's just something that they have to learn, at that stage, so they're ready for it when they get to National 5 or higher.
And it's even the learning to use the print statements and things. It's always interesting watching kids who pick it up quite quickly, just observing you. If I'm sure you've all had it. You really start, you're looking at somebody and you just can't get it. You're like, oh God, I can't do this. And I've had to sometimes get kids, can you print me off your code? Leave it with me. I just can't do it just now. It's too harassing in the class. At the end of class, and I'll sit and look at it. But sometimes them watching, I've seen kids watch me sit and debug and stuff, or putting in print statements, and learning that technique of sometimes you need a false print statement in there to show you what's going on internally, or getting them to use the trace tools and higher and all those kind of things, like the debug tools.
Yeah, following it through, using the step into and things like that. That's what I use quite a lot. And I follow the kids. Or I quite often talk out loud as well. Like when I'm trying to fix something, I'll say, okay, so I'm going to search for this. I'm going to look for that. First thing that I always check for is this. And just mimicking, I suppose, that process, isn't it, is what's going to allow them to...
Yeah, you're trying to hope that a few of them get it as well, and then even listen, talking to another people, you explain to them, tell someone else, because I can't get there at the moment. I'm dealing with over here. Maybe the two of you, if you speak to someone else, and that explanation of the problem can sometimes help.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to our last question then before this week's challenge. So question number 8, all the high numbers it seems. Okay, so how can I develop self-confidence and resilience in pupils so that they are independent during the assignment and don't just keep asking for help? I feel like that's quite a similar question. Any difference between what we've said and the resilience and self-confidence? What do we think?
I think in terms of assignment, that open book nature, and it's giving them the skills to actually use the resources that they have. So it's not just about, right, I'm stuck, so I'm going to put my hand up and the teacher's going to solve my problem. It needs to be, I'm stuck, so I'm going to look at a previous program, or I'm going to look at my notes, or I'm going to look at, it's almost like, is that C3 before me? And trying to train them up that way to give them other avenues of help and get them practicing those other avenues of help before they just go, it doesn't work, you need to come and fix this for me.
Yeah. Have you used? That's why I'm always saying, have you searched in and getting them to keep their stuff organized is another good one. It seems really, really obvious, but nowadays when the kids are using OneDrive and Glow and they've got iPads or Chromebooks, some of them one-to-one devices and things, they've got their stuff all over the place and they're really, really bad at file handling nowadays, no matter how good we teach them. So I think that that's really important too. Some subjects have got Teams and some people have got OneDrives and shared points, and it's just stuff can be all over the place. So I think the kids really working out where all the resources are and how they're going to access them is actually really important for them to build their self-confidence in knowing, if they don't know the answer, how to find the answer. Yeah,
I think it's important, like before assignment, and not just the day before assignment. I think a point before assignment, it's important that you take time out as a teacher and give them time to organise their files, where are my files, and pull them, even like useful files. And I remember David Jack saying, and I think it was our first episode, that he makes sure that very simple things like the name, the programme and the task, so like totaling in a loop, that type of thing, or finding an average, and the name the tasks sensibly. so that they can actually then go back and reference their tasks, so that they know if I'm looking for something, I can go and find it at higher. Obviously, there's a lot more things in there, like finding max algorithm, finding min, and so they can actually quickly reference their own materials. I think those types of things, and actually giving them time to do that is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move on to the challenge. Okay, so this week's challenge, very similar to last week, okay? We're still focused on the assignment. We're still trying to come up with these quick, quirky tasks that can help our kids improve. And this week, we're going to be focusing on analysis. So to pick our teams, we've got our spinner. Going for the red team this week, it is Morag. And for the blue team this week, it is... Okay, so let's go. Actually, well, we've got 10 minutes in the timer, so which means, Colin, you're going to be our judge this week. We're going to go 10 minutes in the timer, and I suppose time starts now, yeah?
I think that's our time up. So let's see what you have come up with. Morag first, the red team. What have you got?
I thought, this requires me to write a problem specification, and I didn't have time to write a problem specification. So what I've done is I've started off, I've got one task saying users of the Jigsaw Scotland website can register for the annual Jigsaw Championships. When the users hover over the submit button, that should be submit, not submit, a picture of a jigsaw should be displayed, and I've asked them to write down 2 end user requirements. So yeah, very short task. I've got a pizza delivery company using a database system, and I haven't actually expanded that much more than to gather orders, store order details, store orders, details of customers, details of pizzas, that type of thing. And I'm basically asking for functional requirements and end user requirements. And I've gone back to the database work that we did way back, a long time ago, Kim, when we were talking about database development, 2023. And we had made the posters about functional requirements and end user requirements. So the functional requirements should always begin the query shoulds, and the end user requirements should begin users of the database should be able to, and it continues from there. So I got that far in the time I had. And for the programming, read the problem description above. So I haven't written a problem description, but it's there. And it's very common that candidates in the assignment have to write down couple of inputs or a couple of processes or a couple of outputs. So I've gone for 2 in each case, but they just need regular practice at doing all those things. So I've gone for little questions on each. I haven't fully fleshed them out though. So back to you, Colin.
So I'm just looking at yours and thinking 2 inputs. It depends how nice you're feeling to them, whether you say 2 inputs because there's only 2, or whether you say all the inputs and they need to figure out, because sometimes it's 1 mark for having all 3 inputs type thing, which is a bit of a sneaky one. Right, thank you, Morag. On to Kim. What have you got? The blue team.
Okay, well, I kind of rushed into, oh my goodness, this is like a 5-minute task that I would use as a starter or something if I was about to do something on analysis with my class. So I quickly ran onto, I think it was the BBC Bite Size website, and stole 3 briefs. So please don't think I wrote these. I stole these 3 briefs that are on the top in the light blue boxes that are for kind of mini programs. And then my idea was going to be state the inputs, processes, and outputs. Then, in all honesty, I panicked and was like, oh no, we need end user requirements and functional requirements. But I've now since realized that they probably aren't really as much for programming as they are for database and web. So I suppose the idea is there. And it's meant to be a chilly challenge where it gets more and more difficult, but I think that maybe you need to tweak it if you're going to use it for web or use it for databases. But the idea is that there's 3 scenarios and that you're pulling information out and you're going to start it with easy and then get more and more complicated. And hopefully if you set a timer, the better kids will manage all 3 tasks. And I would be encouraging them to use, as Morag already mentioned, some of the tools that we already have, maybe the posters and things on the walls with regards to writing the end user and functional requirements. If you don't use them already, use them because it helps your kids massively.
Okay, thank you, Kim. So it's up to me then to decide. I like them both. I think they would both be good as kind of starters. I think with your one, Morag, if it was like a kind of regular thing and you were just putting it up on the board, giving them the show me boards and just say, write down one functional requirement from this wee problem statement, or write down one input and one output, and just drip them in every now and again as starters, that'd be good. I really liked Kim's chili challenge and the idea of it getting progressively harder. And again, I think you could probably do it where it would be like, right, give me any input process or output as your kind of easy level, and then give me both inputs and outputs as medium, and like the processes are normally the harder ones, so that could be like your sort of third level. It's a really tough decision, but I think I am going to award the win this week to my red team.
Okay, will we go over to the scores and the doors then?
Let's do it.
So we've got 5 points for the red team now and 1 point for the sad blue team. So hopefully next week the blue team can help claw it back, or next episode I should say. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, guys. It was wonderful to be with you all. Thanks Colin and Morag for joining me on tonight's episode, and we will see you all next time. Enjoy and speak to you soon. Bye.